Hi, this is Kristen Francis with the Kristen Francis team at Keller Williams Capital Properties. We are the top team in Keller Williams, in fact, the 0.05% in the nation, which is a pretty impressive number, but we credit Keller Williams with giving us the training that we needed to get here. I'd like to pass on a lot of that knowledge, and today I'm going to be talking about the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors exclusive right to list agreement. So this, what does it mean when you hire a real estate broker to sell your home? We have this listing agreement, which is essentially the crux of the partnership between the client and the broker, executed by the salesperson. In this case, it would be me, Kristen Francis, or somebody from my team. So if you have the agreement in front of you, I invite you to follow along and then follow up with any questions that you may have. I'll try to be as thorough as I can and address common questions that we hear, but this will just be a basic overview of the agreement itself. So I have the agreement in front of me, and on page 1 we have the appointment of broker, which is in this case Keller Williams Capital Properties, and they have appointed us, Kristen Francis team, to execute on their behalf. Section 2 is the legal property description. This makes sure that we are in fact talking about the right property and we're not confused in any way as to what the legal description is, so that we can also tie that to the tax record and any title searches that may come. So this will be useful in the future, and it also helps us identify how we're going to list this in the MLS to make sure that we have the right information to appropriately market the property on your behalf. Section number 3 just tells us where it is that you'd like us to send any notifications, any paperwork that we might have. Sometimes this would be condo resale documents or homeowners associations, anything of value, and we want to know how to be able to get in touch with you. And same for us. You would want to know where our brokerage is physically located if you needed anything. The term of the agreement, this is to be determined between the client and the salesperson to figure out what might make sense. For example, if we decided in January that we'd be selling your home, but we knew we wouldn't be selling it until June, we would make it a 9-month or a 1-year listing agreement. This ensures that we are able to market the property within our own networks and to help you prepare the property for sale. So if we needed to do some minor renovations or some major renovations, staging, photography, any of those things that need to be done in advance of an active listing agreement, and then we have a period of time where we'd actively market the property, and then it would be under contract for a period of time until closing. So this is kind of a longer lead time that covers the basis to make sure we're able to appropriately position the property for excessive marketing, and then successful completion of the contract. During this time, we are able to market the property on your behalf and let people in and out, work with cooperating brokerages to bring buyers, and we agree on a particular listing price. So in the section identified in the contract on page 2 for the listing price, this is also something where we have a ballpark number that we're going to put in there, at least as a floor. You know what you might want to net, and we know what that would look like in terms of a sales price. However, I always caution our clients that this information becomes stale every single day. As real estate moves, just like the stock market, we have to adapt, and up to the day before we go live, we may decide to change the list price, which we can do in agreement with the client. So as long as we have a mutual agreement and we put it in writing that this is what the new sales price is going to be, then it can change. So whatever we mark here in the contract is really just a placeholder and an idea of context. This makes sure that we're not taking on a listing that we know is overpriced, which means that we're going to have to put lots of time, effort, and money into marketing a property we know we wouldn't be able to sell for that particular price. Or to make sure that the seller is comfortable that we aren't going to try to sell the property for something much undervalued. When we go to list properties, we really like to right price it, and it comes with quite a strategic plan in how we're going to execute that to make sure that we're not leaving any dollars on the table. So this is something that is a conversation that we'll have in a consultation, but the number that we put in here is not the final number, it's just it's a starting point. Moving on to the conveyances, we want to make sure that we're clearly communicating to the buyer what conveys with the home. It is generally understood that any fixture, anything that is actually attached to the wall or the home, automatically conveys. But there are some things that are removable, such as ceiling fans or appliances, hot tubs, storage sheds, things like that. So there's a whole laundry list of things here. We just want to check how many of each thing we have so that, again, we can clearly convey to the buyer that the sales price comes with these particular features. Below the conveyances, we have an opportunity to mark any items as is. This generally means it may or may not work. We may or may not have ever used it. We don't warrant the condition of it, but don't bother asking us for a repair because we're not going to repair it. This is common with hot tubs or fireplaces or specific ancillary appliances, maybe not for everyday use. And we want to go ahead and say, listen, we know that it's not going to work, so take it as is. Or it doesn't work the best, it's on its last legs, but we're willing to sell the property for X amount of dollars, and this, don't ask us. As is, marketing is something different. That's for the entire property itself. This is often used for investor properties where they actually don't know the condition of the property, or something that we know that there's a lot wrong with the property, and we're very clearly stating that there will be no home inspections, there will be no repairs. Perhaps they could do an inspection and still walk away, but we're clearly communicating to the buyer that this property is take it or leave it. Leased items, this might be an oil tank or a service agreement, whether it would be for landscaping or pest control, water treatment, anything like that. So if there are any leased services or fixtures on the property, we want to let the buyer know if that is something that can convey or not, and whether they're prepaid. The homeowner warranty, we get a lot of questions about this. This is an option. We just have to disclose to the homeowner that they have an opportunity to put a warranty on the property, a home warranty, so that if, for example, an appliance would fail, we could invoke the warranty and have it repaired during that listing period, and or to then pass on to the buyer. So this is something that comes up in negotiations. What I recommend, we always put complimentary seller coverage onto the property, so it's just a hassle-free headache remover. If something does go wrong with the property, we can invoke the warranty during the listing period, and then if the buyer asks us during negotiations to purchase them a warranty, we'll just go ahead and purchase the remainder of the service for the buyer, and it's already in place. Utilities, this is just making sure that we know whether things are gas, electric, public or private. A lot of people have particular preferences to how they like to cook or how they like their heating, and we want to make sure that we are accurate in our description on the MLS. The broker duties, these are all the things that Keller Williams Capital Properties commits that they will do on behalf of the client. So our job, when we represent a seller, we have a fiduciary duty to the seller. So everything that we do must be in the best interest of the seller, and it must also be ethical and comply with the Realtor's Code of Ethics. This means that we can't break certain rules and that we have to treat your property and yourself with due care and diligence. We commit to marketing the property and doing everything that we can to get the most traffic and eyeballs on your property. We want to make sure that we have everybody who possibly could come through who is available and willing to purchase your home, that they have an opportunity to see it. So we won't sit on it. We'll do it quickly and we'll do it thoroughly. We will photograph the property, we'll mark it on the internet. We will receive offers and present them to you in a timely manner, so we won't sit on it for 2 weeks. We will schedule in advance when we're going to deliver these to you. So either we'll tell you we're going to deliver them as they come, or in a competitive situation we might say we're going to hold all offers until such and such a date, and we'll review all offers on that date, and we'll communicate that deadline to the public as well. We won't show the property after we have it under contract unless you tell us that you'd like to, or if we have a reason to, and that is a conversation that we can have. Section F says broker shall account in a timely manner for all money and property received in trust by broker in which seller may or may not have an interest. And that's actually something we don't do. Our title companies do that on our behalf. So when the buyer submits a contract and they have an earnest money deposit, that goes into the title company's escrow account, and that sits there and is protected until settlement. We don't receive any monies or property, but we will take care of your property when it is in our hands. And we will communicate the appropriate showing instructions on the MLS. So if the property is vacant, we might say go and show. If the property is occupied, we might require a certain number of hours notice to the homeowner. We might have certain days blocked out, and we use technology to handle all this to make sure that it's very seamless to the homeowner. You'll know who's coming and going and when, and you'll have complete control over whether or not they can come. We generally install a lockbox. Sometimes it's electronic and sometimes it's combination. Depends on the area and how we think might be the most convenient. But it's our way of allowing access to any contractors that need to go in, or appraisers, any other cooperating brokers for our open houses, so that we don't have to contact the homeowner each time. In the same vein, we'll put a for sale sign in the yard, allowed by whatever the covenants might be. Some areas won't actually allow a sign, some will allow particular signs, but we like to market the property in a physical manner as best we can to get as much traffic as possible. We will market on the MLS and the internet and in person using physical marketing as well as digital. We will list it on the MLS either within 3 days of ratification of the listing agreement or at a time determined. Again, a lot of times we have a much longer lead time with our listings, and so we don't want to put them on the MLS until the home is actually ready. So what we're asking for here is your authorization to market it. So we'll put it on the MLS and through our own systems, and they will syndicate to several hundred third-party sites in the digital variety. So anywhere that a homeowner might be shopping for a house, your home and the marketing that we've put together is going to show up there. In addition, we do circle prospecting, where we will actually door knock the neighborhood. We use our own social media farms and demographic farms that we reach out to, our own client database that we'll be trying to market the property to people we know who might be interested in that specific type of property. And we do what's called a move up campaign. So we're actively targeting people who we know might be looking to move from one particular community to the next. This is totally up to you if you want to let us do this, but of course it is generally in the seller's best interest that we're able to use every marketing mechanism and tool available to us to get as many eyeballs on the property as possible. Some of these websites have kind of like a Yelp or a Zillow, where they're able to comment and have interactive discussion on these discussion boards about particular properties. So that's where the comments get to be addressed. I haven't seen anything negative so far, but there are some websites that have more of an interactive style. The types of real estate representation. This is another common question we get. So it used to be, once upon a time, that all real estate agents worked on behalf of the seller. There was no such thing as a buyer representation. So buyers just got to go shopping for a house, and they got to ask the listing agent questions and hope that they didn't get totally screwed in the end. So somewhere along the line, the addition of the buyer agent became popular. And so what happens is, instead of, if for example a listing agent commission is 6%, the listing agent would start offering half of their commission to the buyer agent for doing half of their job. So there's people that have buyers and they know that they're looking in particular areas and would be actively pursuing particular properties, and they would bring the buyer. So the listing brokerage ends up compensating the buyer agent for being a cooperating broker and bringing the buyer for that property. So what the representation means now is that seller representation, when we have a listing, again, our fiduciary duty is to you and not to the buyer. The buyer has their own representation and their own agent who's looking out for their best interest to make sure that the property that they're getting is for a good price and is in good condition, is a good investment. And on the listing side, we're trying to make sure we're taking a solid buyer and we're getting top dollar for our clients, and to make sure that we actually get through to settlement and for the buyer to close on the home. When we have two agents that work for the same brokerage, it is potential for a dual representation. So what that means is the same person at a brokerage representing the buyer and the seller. In that event, the agent is unable to counsel either the buyer or the seller on items of negotiation. So they then become pretty much a lame duck, and they're just a transaction coordinator and no longer an advisor. So in this case, the Chris and Francis team does not perform dual agency. We perform what's called designated agency, where we have another agent from the same brokerage representing the other party. So if we were to have an unrepresented buyer or another buyer brought by one of our agents, we would separate ourselves, and the listing agent supports only the seller again, and the other agent represents only the buyer. And each party is looking out for their own client's interests. And that's what we call designated representation. Technically, the relationship between the client and the broker is with the actual broker, not the salesperson. And that's why it's the dual and designated representation. The broker designates a different party to represent the remaining party. And that does require a separate disclosure when you're putting together the contract, because both parties need to know that either that agent is representing both parties or they have assigned another agent to represent the opposing party. Along these lines is the broker compensation. So the seller pays the full commission to the listing brokerage. And if a cooperating broker brings the buyer, then the listing broker who's receiving the full commission will then share their own commission with the buyer agency. So it's not that the seller is compensating both the listing agent and the buyer's agent. It is that the listing agent is sharing their commission with the buyer agent for doing a portion of their job. And so here we agree to what we will offer the other party if they should bring the buyer to us. And that is the number that we advertise in the MLS so that all the buyer's agents know what we promise to pay them if they bring the buyer. Variable rate commission we don't do. That's kind of like a net commission. If, for example, we had decided we were going to sell a house for $650 for a certain amount, and then we sold it for $670, and we would get a different type of commission because of that extra monies that we sold the house for. We don't do that. Additionally, we don't do a retainer fee, which is in here, and that means you owe us a certain amount of money to retain our services, much like lawyers do. And whether or not you sell a property, we are guaranteed at least that money. We don't do that. We believe that we work really hard, and if our client doesn't get to sell a home or buy a home, then we don't earn our money either. It is our job to actually make sure that that happens. Early termination, what this means is if we're not doing our job and the brokerage has not performed according to the contract, then the client is free to terminate us, and there's no penalty. If there's no reason for termination and you decide that it's Tuesday and you'd like to move on or terminate the agreement for any reason that's not for a breach of contract, then there are certain expenses that need to be recouped. In our case, it's usually the physical marketing expenses and the dollars that we have already outlaid on behalf of you to market your property. And if we don't have the opportunity to then recoup those costs by selling the property, then we ask you to compensate us for that. Confidential information means we are your secret keepers. We are the vault, and if you tell us things that impact your sale, we are not allowed to share them unless you give us permission to do so. It does help us understand context, and it's a very intimate thing that we do when we sell homes. I talk about it being the ultimate confluence of personal and professional. We are professionals handling your personal life, and it is in fact very intimate. So it is in your best interest that we maintain your complete confidentiality, and unless there is a reason and you want us to share information with anyone else, we don't do that. We do, however, ask for authorization to disclose other offers. So in many cases, we'll end up getting more than one offer, and it makes sense to be able to disclose to other parties that we do have another offer to create that sense of urgency and to be able to negotiate up. But if you did not want us to disclose that, you don't have to, and you can check that box on the listing agreement. Compliance with fair housing laws. This is a big one. This is part of our code of ethics as well, that we will uphold fair housing regulations and work with the utmost integrity. This means that we can't discriminate according to race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin, or any other protected classes based on the particular jurisdictions. For example, DC and Virginia have different protected classes, and we are not allowed to discriminate on any of those grounds, and neither are our clients. So if someone brings an offer to purchase a home and that meets the criteria for which we've marketed for, then we are not allowed to discriminate against them. So we can't say, no, we're going to take that offer because we don't like you because of one of these protected reasons. In a relocation program, especially with a lot of our military and diplomats and some corporate transfers, there are particular relocation programs that come with a certain set of restrictions, and we ask for that information to be disclosed here in the listing agreement. In the condo association or the property owners associations, there are covenants within that condo or homeowner association, and we need to have the information for those covenants because we have to order resale documents to be able to provide that to the buyer. Additionally, we need to know if there's any signage restrictions or anything like that of the homeowner or condo association. And it's always going to be one or the other. It's not going to be both. In Arlington and DC, there are generally not homeowners associations unless you're in a townhouse or a condo, in which case it would be a condo association. And in many other areas, there are very strict guidelines for the property owners associations. The property condition, it is a requirement that we report all material defects to the buyer, anything known or that could be known to the buyer. So if you know, for example, your roof has a leak, we need you to tell us that because we have to tell the buyer. Virginia is, however, a buyer beware state, so the buyer will have an opportunity to conduct a home inspection and to perform any other due diligence to make sure that the house that they're getting doesn't have any skeletons. However, if we know something and we do not disclose it, then that we can be held liable for that. So we'll provide you with the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act, where we basically say, here's something that's wrong with the property, and I understand that I have an obligation to report any and all material defects to you. A lead-based paint disclosure. Any homes that were built before 1978 were commonly painted with lead-based paint, and this presents a hazard they found out later in life. A lot of these communities are built in 1930, 40, 50, depending on the settlements of the particular area. And they're so buried with paints and layers and layers and layers of paint that by now any lead-based paint is really deep buried underneath. And I like to say, you know, if you have kids, don't let them chew on the windowsills. But it is in fact a hazard if you were to go and renovate the house and take out a wall and release those particles into the air. The contractors who would do any of that actually have to abide by certain disposal and protective gear when they actually make any renovations to the home. So that's what this disclosure is for. Any buyer has an opportunity to conduct a lead-based paint test to see if there is in fact lead-based paint there. We assume most of the time that there is if it's been built before 1978, and so especially in competitive situations, we end up not seeing those contingencies come through where they want to conduct the inspection, but they do have an opportunity to do that. If you have had a lead-based paint test done at some point because you went under renovations and you received the results of that, you would need to provide any and all records of those tests and reports to the buyer. And in that disclosure, it will say, yes, I have knowledge of lead-based paint, here are my reports, or no, I have no knowledge. It doesn't mean it's not there, it just means that you don't know whether or not it is there. We might assume that it's there, but if we don't have actual knowledge, then we say, I don't know. Current liens. This whole section is for two purposes. One is to make sure that you are in fact able to sell the home legally, that it belongs to you. We understand anyone else who might have an interest in the property, any liens on the mortgage, or liens on the property rather, or construction or financing, any other reason, any third-party interest in the property. And we provide this information to the title company so that if you do have liens on the property, the title company will make sure that those are satisfied so that you can in fact pass clear title on to the new buyer. This also means that if you are in default or bankruptcy, we need to know that in advance because we don't want to be spinning our wheels and spending lots of time, effort, and money to market a property that in fact we cannot sell because it is in bankruptcy or foreclosure. Doesn't mean we can't sell it, it means that there's a different way that it has to be sold, and the price point for which we might sell it is specified by a third party. And as much as we love helping everyone, most of us do have children and we don't work for fun, we do work for business. And so we want to make sure that we've done our due diligence and we do have a product that we can in fact sell. If there's any judgments against you, we need to know about that. If it's encumbered by a loan, we just need you to tell us so that we can make sure that it gets paid off and that it doesn't come back to haunt you later. Seller financing is not a common opportunity, but it does happen. It basically means that the seller becomes the bank. So if a buyer should come along who had difficulty getting a loan, or maybe was a relative or a friend, and the seller decided they wanted to extend the mortgage to the buyer directly without having a bank do it. So in that case, you would have a lawyer draw up what that financing agreement looks like, and the seller would become the bank. Closing costs are the external costs that are incurred upon the transfer of a property. So local and federal governments impose specific taxes. There are surveys that are done and title search and things that get mailed back and forth. There are notaries. There's deed preparations. There's lawyers that are involved. Part of the closing costs is the real estate commissions. In Virginia, there is a congestion relief fee, which is kind of funny because if you look at our congestion here, it's not working. We have a grantor's tax and a transfer tax. Half of that is to the seller and half of that is to the buyer. And we can ask the title company to give us an estimate of the closing costs so that we know when we've determined the ultimate sales price for your home, we can back into the net value by estimating the closing costs. The proceeds of the sale, so when we go to settlement, we're selling your home, and we sit down, we sign all of the papers and transfer the deed over to the buyer. The title company has 2 business days to record the deed, and then they will disperse the funds. So some people get upset that the money's not available right at the settlement table, and that is because they have to be able to record the deed before they can actually release the funds. So generally, if you settle in the morning, you're often able to go to the courthouse and record the deed that afternoon and release the money by the end of the day, but it doesn't always happen right away. Ferc Debt, Irs and Ferc Debt. This is a new one. This is where foreign persons owning property must have a tax withholding. And it can be sticky, and it requires disclosure in the listing agreement and in the contract because that tax must be paid, and it can become a problem for the new buyer if the previous owner who was a foreign person didn't pay the tax. So if there is a foreign person, I think it's a 10% tax. If there's a foreign person that owns the property, 10% of the proceeds will be withheld to pay that tax. If you are a U.S. citizen, that does not apply, and we need you to check that yes or no box in the listing agreement. The seller also has duties. This is not a one-way street, this is a partnership, and we're going to do everything that we can to sell the property, and we ask that you have a couple of responsibilities as well. And that is to make sure that you're disclosing to us all pertinent information, as I mentioned before, any material defects, any disclosures of the property condition, we need to know that. We need to know that you can convey good and marketable title. That means no one else you know has an interest in it. It means you are the only one who has the right to sell the property. If there are other people, we actually have to have their agreement on this listing as well. We need to understand that you are not offering this opportunity to any other real estate brokerages for marketing. Again, we want to make sure that all the efforts that we are performing on your behalf, that we actually have an opportunity to be able to sell the home, and that we don't have multiple parties offering the same thing. And that we also need to know that there isn't anyone that has a first right of refusal on the property. So if there's any agreements out there that someone else could or should be able to buy the property should you decide to sell it over somebody in the public, we need to be made aware of that. We also need to know if you're a licensed realtor, active or inactive in this state or any other. We have to disclose that to the buyer as well. We need to know if there are any or were any underground storage tanks. We have to disclose that. And we need to know if the property is tenant occupied currently. We will have different ways to handle that particular situation with coordination with the tenants and when we would actually market the property. Okay, the last one is the recording system. This is a new one. A lot of people have security cameras inside and outside the home that also have audio capability. We were running into some trouble when sellers were using these baby monitors and things to eavesdrop on buyers coming through the property. And that gained an unfair advantage to the seller because they could hear the buyers talk amongst themselves or to their agents about what they thought of the home. And if they were talking about strategic offers, the seller would be able to overhear that, and then it would put a damper on the negotiations, and it's just an invasion of their privacy. So we're not allowed to use audio recording on the property, and if you do have any kind of recording, we need to be made aware of that. Access to the property, you're going to give us keys to the property. We're going to be able to come and go according to however we have agreed is appropriate. We need to be able to get in and take pictures. If there are tenants, we need to have a copy of the lease, and we need to understand how to get in touch with them to coordinate access there as well. The seller assumption of risk, it's still your house. It's in our care, and we're doing our best to market it and to sell it on your behalf, but if it burns down, it's still your house. If your house is vacant, you need to have that vacancy clause in your homeowner's insurance. If something should happen, like a water pipe would burst and you weren't there and your house floods, your insurance company can turn you down for the claim if you have been out of the home more than X number of days, which is going to vary based on your insurance coverage. So again, we're going to do the best we can to take care of your house, but it still belongs to you. So make sure that you exercise due care and or have a property manager. If the house is vacant during the listing period, we need to have an agreement as to whom is maintaining your home. That's cleaning, that's landscaping, that's trash, anything else that might be timely in a vacant home. Miscellaneous provisions means that we are realtors. We are not necessarily CPAs or lawyers or interior designers or psychologists or any other licensed professional. So we may give you recommendations for people we think might be good to solve particular problems, but remember that anything that we say, unless it has to do with real estate, we are not experts, and you should not rely only on our opinion. So don't ask me for tax advice. I might tell you what I do, but I'm not qualified to actually answer that question. Same thing with the service provider referrals. Again, we will tell you who we think might do well, but we are not responsible for them and we don't own them. And so things could go poorly, and we don't want that to be resting on our shoulders. So it will deter real estate agents from handing out service referrals. We still like to, we give a preferred list to say, hey, we've had good experience with these people, but remember that they own their own companies and we are not able to control them. Wire fraud. This is a new one. This is a big one. There are hackers out there who are targeting real estate agent emails and social media accounts and title companies. And they will spoof our email addresses and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, give us your account information or send a check here. And they know that you're sort of expecting to hear that because you're in the middle of a real estate transaction. And then the sellers will hand over money, or buyers will hand over the money to these hackers, and that money is gone. So we will never ask you for account information. We will never ask you to give us money. The title company will ask you for your account information if you want the proceeds wired to you. But even that is not done without a phone call authorization, like a second tier verification, and essentially a code word. So no matter what, if you get an email, a text message, a smoke signal, a social media post regarding anything having to do with your finances, please report it to us immediately and likely the authorities, and do not ever share Social Security or account information. Subsequent offers after contract acceptance. So there might be people who really, if we ratify an offer and then somebody else comes by and says, no, I really want to buy your house too, please, here's a contract. We will still receive those contracts and present them to you, though we wouldn't be in a situation where we would be able to accept one necessarily. We could keep it as a backup offer, but we are still legally obligated to present it to you no matter when we receive an offer. The governing law is the state of Virginia, so any laws there, any questions will be mandated by that particular jurisdiction. This is a binding agreement, so if you sign the agreement, it is in fact a legal agreement. If you need to have a lawyer look over it, that's fine. This is put together by the National Virginia Association of Realtors and their team of lawyers. So this is the agreement that we use. We're not allowed to modify it other than the fill in the blanks that they've given us and some small area for additional terms for any exceptions that we might need to make. Attorney's fees. If someone is in breach of contract, the breach party may be liable for the other party's legal fees because it was their fault. So we try not to get into any arguments, and we certainly advocate for third-party services before people go slapping lawsuits around. But this listing agreement really has prevented most of that because it is pretty cut and dry. So though it does take me 36 minutes to go through these terms, they are here to protect you and they are here to protect us, to make sure that we have been very clear, we're on the same page, and we understand what the duties are for all parties. At the end of the day, we're going to work really, really hard to sell your home, and we're going to have a great time doing it. And our job is to make sure that there is no dollar left on the table, and we put as much as we possibly can in your pocket, more than anybody else for any other reason would be able to do. And that's our job. We want to make raving fans out of you because our business is entirely based on referrals. That means we don't advertise for business, and it is absolutely by word of mouth. Everything that you say to another person makes our business go round, and we want to make sure that you have an exceptional experience and you're inspired to do so. So I thank you for giving us this opportunity. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any custom questions you may have, and I hope this gave you a bit of an education and some comfort as to what we're about to embark on. So thanks again.